Some people think money gives them the right to humiliate anyone standing below them. Ethan Caldwell believed that too, right up until the night an entire room stopped fearing him. The jazz music inside Caldwell Grand moved softly beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, while servers in black uniforms crossed the marble floor with perfect timing. Outside, rain tapped against the tall Manhattan windows, turning the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. Every table inside the rooftop restaurant had been booked for weeks. Politicians, athletes, old money, new money, people who smiled carefully whenever Ethan Caldwell entered a room. At 39 years old, Ethan had built one of the largest luxury hotel empires in America. Magazines called him brilliant. Business networks called him ruthless. Employees called him Sir, with the kind of nervous respect that only came from knowing one mistake could end a career. The private elevator opened with a soft chime. Conversation lowered instantly. Ethan stepped out wearing a charcoal gray suit worth more than most people's monthly rent. His silver watch caught the light as he adjusted his cuff. Behind him followed lawyers, investors, and security guards who moved like shadows around a king. The restaurant manager, Marcus Hale, rushed forward so quickly he nearly slipped. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell," he said, forcing a smile. "Your table is ready." Ethan barely looked at him. "It should have been ready 10 minutes ago." Marcus swallowed hard. "Of course, sir." Naomi Brooks watched the scene quietly from across the room while balancing a tray of sparkling water glasses against one shoulder. She had worked double shifts all week. Her feet hurt. The back of her neck ached. But none of that showed on her face. She moved carefully through the crowded restaurant, calm and steady while wealthy guests laughed over $1,000 bottles of wine. At 28 years old, Naomi had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Smile politely. Speak softly. Keep moving. That was how people survived in places built for the rich. But there was something unusual about her tonight. Even exhausted, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that didn't belong to someone afraid. Marcus hurried toward her near the service station. "Naomi," he whispered sharply, "you're taking Mr. Caldwell's table. And please, no mistakes tonight." Naomi nodded once. "Understood." Across the restaurant, Ethan removed his coat while two investors laughed at something he said. He looked completely comfortable being the center of attention, like the entire building existed to reflect his importance back at him. Naomi approached the table with professional calm. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Caldwell Grand." Ethan didn't look up from his phone. "Water," he said flatly. Still, Naomi began pouring carefully into crystal glasses. Around them, conversations blended with soft piano notes and the distant sound of rain hitting the windows. Then it happened. One of the investors shifted his chair backward unexpectedly. Naomi adjusted instinctively to avoid colliding with him. The tray tilted slightly. A few drops of water landed on Ethan Caldwell's sleeve. Silence. Immediate. Brutal. The investor froze. Marcus stopped breathing from across the room. Naomi lowered the pitcher slowly. "I'm sorry, sir," she said calmly. Ethan stared at the dark spots on his cuff like someone had committed a crime against him. His jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Naomi remained composed. "I apologize. I'll bring napkins immediately." But Ethan stood up before she could move. His chair scraped loudly across the floor. Every nearby guest turned toward them. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "This place gets worse every year." Marcus rushed over instantly. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry." Ethan lifted one hand, stopping him. His eyes stayed locked on Naomi. Cold. Sharp. Humiliating. Maybe if they hired professionals instead of careless charity cases, this wouldn't happen. Naomi felt dozens of eyes on her now. Some uncomfortable. Some curious. Most silent. She could have apologized again. Most employees would have. But she simply stood there holding the silver pitcher steadily in both hands. Ethan stepped closer. "Are you even listening to me?" The music seemed quieter now. Even the piano player had slowed down. Naomi finally met his eyes directly. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. "I'm listening." Something about her calmness irritated him even more. People usually panicked around Ethan Caldwell. They looked down. They rushed to fix things. Naomi didn't. And for the first time that night, the billionaire looked less powerful than angry. He took another step forward. His hand lifted suddenly into the air as if instinct and ego had collided at once. Gasps spread through the restaurant. A champagne glass slipped from someone's fingers in the distance and shattered against marble. Naomi didn't flinch, not even a little. Then a woman's voice cut through the silence like a blade. If he touches her, the voice said coldly, tomorrow's headline belongs to me. Every head turned toward the corner booth near the windows. Olivia Pierce slowly stood from her seat, setting down her wine glass beside an open phone camera pointed directly at Ethan Caldwell. For 3 long seconds, nobody inside Caldwell Grand moved. Ethan Caldwell stood frozen beside the table, his raised hand suspended halfway between anger and disbelief, while the reflection of Olivia Pierce's phone camera glimmered directly at him from across the restaurant. Rain rolled down the massive windows behind her like silver lines across dark glass. The piano player stopped completely. Even the kitchen doors stopped swinging. Olivia stepped away from her booth slowly, elegant in a cream-colored evening suit that made her impossible to ignore. Every person in Manhattan recognized her face. She was the journalist billionaires feared most because she never sounded emotional when she destroyed someone's reputation. She sounded calm. I suggest, Olivia said evenly, that everybody in this room remembers there are over 4 million followers waiting for me to post tonight. Ethan lowered his hand immediately, but the damage had already landed. Not physically, socially, emotionally, publicly, and he knew it. His eyes shifted toward the glowing phone camera pointed at him like evidence in a courtroom. Marcus Hale nearly stumbled forward trying to repair the situation. Miss Pierce, he said nervously, I am sure there is a misunderstanding. Olivia never looked at him. A misunderstanding, she repeated. I watched a billionaire humiliate a waitress over a few drops of water. Several guests quietly exchanged looks. One man at the bar slowly lowered his whiskey glass. Another guest discreetly pulled out his own phone. The atmosphere inside the restaurant had changed completely. 5 minutes earlier, Ethan Caldwell owned the room. Now the room was watching him carefully, deciding whether to fear him or judge him. Naomi remained standing beside the table with both hands calmly wrapped around the silver pitcher. Her breathing stayed steady. That unsettled Ethan more than Olivia's camera. Most people cracked under pressure. Naomi did not. Ethan straightened his jacket slowly, trying to recover control. This employee ruined a custom Italian suit, he said coldly. I reacted. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Interesting choice of words. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. Ethan glanced around the restaurant and realized something unfamiliar was happening. Nobody was rushing to defend him anymore. The investors at his table looked uncomfortable. A couple near the windows shook their heads quietly. Somewhere in the back, a server whispered, "Oh my God." Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but clear enough to cut through the tension. I already apologized, sir. Ethan looked at her again. There it was. That same composure. No trembling voice. No tears. No desperation. Just dignity standing directly in front of his ego. Marcus stepped closer to Naomi and lowered his voice urgently. Go to the kitchen, he whispered. Now. Naomi nodded once and turned carefully toward the service hallway. But before she could leave, Ethan spoke again. You know what, he said sharply. Forget the kitchen. You are done here. Marcus looked horrified. Mr. Caldwell, I said she is done. Naomi stopped walking. The words hung in the air while several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Olivia folded her arms. You are firing her publicly too? Ethan's jaw tightened. This is my hotel. Olivia gave a slow nod. Exactly. Naomi turned back toward Ethan. The overhead chandelier reflected softly across her tired eyes, but her expression never broke. If losing this job makes tonight easier for you, she said quietly, then do what you think you need to do. Ethan stared at her. Something about the sentence irritated him more than yelling would have. There was no fear in her voice. No pleading. Only honesty. And honesty sounded dangerous in a room built on power. One of the older guests near the fireplace suddenly stood up from his chair. Judge Eleanor Whitmore, former federal judge, respected across New York. Her silver necklace caught the light as she slowly approached the table. Marcus looked ready to faint. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Whitmore said calmly, before you embarrass yourself further, perhaps you should ask why your employee remained calmer than the billionaire threatening her. Ethan forced a controlled smile. With respect, Judge, this is an internal matter. No, she replied softly. The second a room full of people witnessed it, It stopped being private. Olivia smiled slightly at that. More phones appeared now. Not openly. Quietly. Guests pretending to text while recording everything. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Ethan always noticed when control started slipping away. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Inside Caldwell Grand, the pressure became unbearable. Naomi looked toward the kitchen hallway again, ready to leave the situation behind. But then Judge Whitmore looked directly at her face and suddenly froze. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion first, then recognition. "Wait," the judge whispered. "I know you." Naomi blinked in surprise. "I am sorry." Judge Whitmore stepped closer beneath the chandelier light, studying her carefully. 3 years ago, she said slowly. The subway platform on Lexington Avenue. The young woman who stayed beside me after I collapsed. The entire restaurant went silent again. Naomi's face changed for the first time all night. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The expression on Ethan Caldwell's face changed instantly. Not because he cared about Naomi Brooks. Not because of guilt. But because powerful men understood one dangerous truth better than anyone else in the world. The moment a crowd stopped seeing you as untouchable, everything became fragile. Judge Eleanor Whitmore stood beneath the chandelier light, staring at Naomi with visible disbelief, while whispers spread quietly through the restaurant like sparks through dry paper. "It was you," the judge repeated softly. "The young woman from the subway station." Naomi looked uncomfortable with the attention immediately. "Judge Whitmore," she said politely, "you do not need to do this." But the older woman ignored her completely. "I collapsed on that platform during rush hour," she said, now speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Hundreds of people walked past me. Some stared. Most kept moving." Olivia Pierce slowly lowered her wine glass without taking her eyes off Naomi. Ethan remained motionless beside the table, his carefully controlled expression beginning to crack around the edges. Judge Whitmore continued. But she stayed. The restaurant stayed silent. Rain pressed harder against the windows now, and lightning briefly illuminated the Manhattan skyline behind them. "She called emergency services," the judge said. "She sat beside me for 43 minutes until the ambulance arrived, because she thought I might wake up frightened and alone." Naomi shifted awkwardly. Anybody would have done that. Judge Whitmore looked directly at her. "No," she said quietly. "They did not." Those words landed heavily across the room. Ethan glanced around and noticed something unsettling. People were no longer looking at Naomi like a waitress. They were looking at her like a human being with a story. And stories were dangerous because they destroyed simple assumptions. Olivia stepped closer now, her phone still recording. "Did you know who she was at the time?" she asked the judge. Judge Whitmore shook her head slowly. "Not until months later." Her eyes returned to Naomi. "You disappeared before anyone could thank you properly." Naomi gave a small shrug. "I had work that night." Ethan looked at Naomi again, but this time something about the image in front of him no longer matched the version he had created in his head. A few minutes ago, she had been invisible to him. Another employee. Another server carrying drinks across expensive floors. But now the room had shifted. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who Naomi Brooks really was. Marcus Hale looked stunned. "Naomi," he whispered quietly, "you never told us that." "Because it was not important," she answered. Olivia almost smiled at that response. "Actually," she said calmly, "it says quite a lot." One of the investors seated at Ethan's table leaned backward uncomfortably. Another quietly reached for his jacket, clearly reconsidering whether he wanted to remain part of the evening. The pressure surrounding Ethan continued building inch by inch. Invisible. Suffocating. Judge Whitmore turned slowly toward him. "And this," she said evenly, "is the woman you were prepared to publicly humiliate over a stained sleeve." Ethan's jaw tightened immediately. "I did not touch her." Olivia responded before anyone else could. "No," she said coldly. "You just made sure everybody in this room understood you wanted to." Several guests looked down at their plates. Others looked directly at Ethan now without fear. That was the part he hated most. Ethan Caldwell was used to controlling narratives. Boardrooms. Interviews. Investors. Employees. But tonight the story was escaping his hands in real time. Naomi finally set the silver pitcher down carefully onto a nearby tray. Her hands remained perfectly steady. "Judge Whitmore," she said softly, "I appreciate your kindness, but I really do not want trouble for anyone. Ethan almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. Trouble had already arrived. Olivia's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. She glanced down briefly and raised one eyebrow. Interesting, she murmured. Ethan noticed immediately. What? Olivia looked directly at him. People are already posting clips online. Marcus turned pale. Already. Welcome to Manhattan, Olivia replied. Nothing stays private after midnight. Ethan pulled out his own phone quickly. The first video had already appeared across social media. Grainy footage. His raised hand. Naomi standing motionless beneath the chandelier. Olivia's voice cutting through the silence. Thousands of views climbing by the second. His face hardened. Who recorded this? Nobody answered. Because it no longer mattered. Judge Whitmore looked around the restaurant slowly before speaking one final time. Money can purchase luxury, she said quietly. It can purchase silence too, sometimes. But dignity. Her eyes moved toward Naomi. That comes from character. The room remained silent after that. No applause. No dramatic reactions. Just the uncomfortable realization spreading through wealthy strangers that they had almost watched a powerful man destroy someone decent simply because he could. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket slowly. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain inside his own building. Naomi noticed it too. She could see the shift happening behind his eyes. Not remorse. Not yet. Something smaller. More fragile. The terrifying realization that public respect could disappear faster than wealth ever could. Then the kitchen doors suddenly swung open behind Naomi, and a young busboy rushed forward looking panicked. Naomi, he whispered breathlessly, your brother is calling again. He says it is urgent. Naomi's expression changed immediately. Naomi Brooks grabbed the phone from the young busboy with sudden urgency, while the entire restaurant continued watching her like she had become the center of a story nobody expected tonight. Daniel, she answered quickly, stepping a few feet away from the crowd. Her voice softened instantly. What happened? Ethan Caldwell remained standing near the table, but nobody was looking at him anymore. The attention had shifted completely. Olivia Pierce lowered her phone slightly, studying Naomi carefully while Judge Eleanor Whitmore waited nearby with concern in her eyes. Across the room, wealthy guests whispered quietly behind raised wine glasses. Naomi listened silently for several seconds. Then her shoulders tensed. Slow down, she said gently into the phone. What did the doctor say? Marcus Hale exchanged a confused glance with another server. Ethan noticed it too. For the first time all evening, Naomi looked shaken. Not by humiliation. Not by public pressure. By fear. Real fear. I am coming as soon as my shift ends. Naomi whispered. She paused again, listening carefully while pressing one hand against her forehead. Daniel, listen to me. Do not leave the hospital waiting room, okay? I will figure something out. The call ended. Naomi stood motionless for a second beneath the soft golden lighting while the noise of rain and distant thunder filled the silence around her. Judge Whitmore approached first. Is everything all right? Naomi forced a polite smile that fooled absolutely nobody. My younger brother is at St. Vincent Medical Center, she said quietly. His asthma attacks have been getting worse. Marcus looked alarmed. Daniel is in the hospital? Naomi nodded once. Again. Ethan watched carefully now without speaking. Something about the situation felt deeply unfamiliar to him. Problems inside his world were solved with assistants, contracts, and private doctors. But the exhaustion on Naomi's face came from a different kind of life entirely. The kind where every emergency carried a price tag. Olivia folded her arms softly. How old is your brother? 19, Naomi answered. He is studying engineering at City College. Judge Whitmore smiled faintly. That is impressive. Naomi looked down briefly. He earned scholarships. Ethan noticed the way she said it. Not with pride for herself. Pride for him. That detail stayed with him unexpectedly. Marcus lowered his voice. Naomi, why did you not tell me things were this serious? Naomi gave a tired smile. Because everybody here already has problems. Judge Whitmore looked toward Ethan slowly after hearing that. The contrast inside the room had become impossible to ignore now. One person worried about a stained designer sleeve. Another worried about hospital bills and whether her brother could breathe properly through the night. Olivia's phone buzzed again repeatedly. She glanced down and exhaled quietly. The video already crossed 200,000 views. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. Give me that. Olivia raised one eyebrow. Excuse me. Your phone. Ethan stepped forward carefully, lowering his voice. This does not need to become a media circus. Olivia almost laughed. Too late. Ethan glanced around and realized several guests were openly filming now. The investors at his table looked deeply uncomfortable. One of them leaned toward another and whispered something while shaking his head. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Caldwell, perhaps we should move this discussion somewhere private. Ethan ignored him. His eyes stayed on Naomi. How much? Naomi looked confused. What? The hospital bills, Ethan said flatly. How much are they? Olivia immediately frowned. Judge Whitmore looked disappointed before Naomi even answered. I am not asking you for money, Naomi said quietly. Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket impatiently. I did not say you were. I am offering a solution. Naomi stared at him for a moment. Then she shook her head slowly. That is the difference between us, Mr. Caldwell. The room stayed silent again. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Meaning? Naomi met his gaze directly beneath the chandelier light. You think every uncomfortable moment disappears if somebody writes a large enough check. Olivia looked almost impressed by the answer. Marcus silently prayed nobody else started recording because he already knew this night would haunt the hotel forever. Ethan's jaw tightened again. You are turning down help for your brother because of pride? Naomi answered calmly. No, because dignity matters too. Those words landed harder than shouting ever could. Ethan looked at her carefully now. Really carefully for the first time. Her shoes were worn at the edges. Tiny exhaustion lines rested beneath her eyes. Her uniform sleeves were slightly faded from too many overnight washes. But somehow she still stood straighter than half the wealthy people in the room. Judge Whitmore finally spoke again. Young lady, she said softly, what exactly are your plans after this job? Naomi hesitated. I used to be in law school. Olivia blinked. Used to? Naomi nodded slowly. I left during my second year after my mother got sick. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You were studying law? At Columbia, Judge Whitmore added suddenly, recognizing the answer before Naomi confirmed it. Ethan looked genuinely surprised now. Naomi gave a small, embarrassed nod. I could not afford tuition after the medical bills started. Outside the windows, lightning flashed across Manhattan again, while silence spread through Caldwell Grand for the third time that night. But this silence felt different. Heavier. Because the room was finally realizing the same thing at once. Ethan Caldwell had tried to humiliate a woman who had sacrificed her future to save her family. The atmosphere inside Caldwell Grand no longer felt like a luxury restaurant. It felt like a courtroom where every person had quietly chosen a side. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of the dining room surrounded by crystal glasses, polished marble, and million-dollar conversations. Yet somehow he looked more isolated than anyone else in the building. Naomi Brooks remained calm beside the service station while whispers continued spreading across the room. Some guests were openly searching her name online now. Others were replaying the video clip that had already exploded across social media. Olivia Pierce checked her phone again and exhaled slowly through her nose. 300,000 views, she murmured. Ethan looked at her sharply. Stop announcing it like a sports score. Olivia slipped her phone into her purse without concern. Then perhaps do not create moments people cannot stop watching. Marcus Hale rubbed one trembling hand across his forehead. He had managed luxury restaurants for 15 years, but he had never seen power shift this quickly inside a room. One mistake, one raised hand, one camera. That was all it took now. Judge Whitmore stepped closer to Naomi again. You left Columbia Law School to care for your mother? Naomi nodded once. She was diagnosed with kidney failure during my second year. And nobody helped you? The judge asked softly. Naomi gave a small tired smile. Hospitals do not accept good intentions as payment. Ethan listened carefully now despite himself. Something about the way she answered bothered him. Not because she sounded emotional. Because she did not. Her voice carried the exhaustion of somebody who had accepted difficult realities a long time ago without expecting sympathy from anyone. Marcus spoke. Quietly. Naomi worked almost every overnight shift after her mother got sick. He looked toward Ethan nervously before continuing. Sometimes 16 hours straight. Naomi glanced at him. Marcus, please. But the manager kept talking anyway. She covered holidays for everyone. Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's Eve. His voice shook slightly. Half the staff here survived difficult months because she picked up extra shifts nobody else wanted. Several employees standing near the kitchen lowered their eyes silently. One hostess nodded faintly in agreement. Ethan noticed every detail. The respect, the loyalty, the affection. None of it matched the image he had built in his mind earlier tonight. He looked at Naomi again. Really looked at her. The worn shoes. The tired eyes. The posture that somehow still carried dignity despite exhaustion. Then a memory surfaced unexpectedly in his mind. 3 years earlier. A business conference in Chicago. His father had said something during a private dinner after too much whiskey. The dangerous people are never the loud ones, Ethan. The dangerous ones are the people who suffer quietly and still keep their character. Ethan had ignored the lesson back then. Tonight, those words returned with uncomfortable clarity. Olivia leaned lightly against the table beside her. Do you know what people online are saying right now? Ethan said nothing. They are not angry because you are rich. Olivia continued calmly. They are angry because they watched a powerful man try to humiliate someone decent. Ethan finally spoke. I did not touch her. No, Olivia replied evenly. You just wanted the room to watch her feel small. Silence settled heavily again. Naomi looked down briefly before speaking softly. Mr. Caldwell, I never wanted any of this attention. Ethan studied her face carefully. Then why challenge me? Naomi looked genuinely confused. Challenge you? Most people would have apologized and walked away. Naomi answered without hesitation. I did apologize. Ethan stared at her. Not the way people usually do around me. That sentence slipped out before he could stop it. The room noticed immediately. Judge Whitmore folded her arms slowly, perhaps because she still remembers she is a human being. Ethan looked away toward the rain-covered windows. Manhattan glowed outside in streaks of gold and white beneath the storm clouds. Somewhere below the rooftop restaurant, traffic horns echoed through the wet streets. Inside the silence, Naomi's phone vibrated again. She checked the screen quickly. Her expression tightened. I need to leave soon, she said quietly. Daniel's breathing treatments are not working. Marcus immediately nodded. Go. I will handle the rest. But Ethan suddenly spoke again. Wait. Everyone looked at him. Even the rain outside seemed quieter for a moment. Ethan reached into his suit pocket slowly and pulled out a black business card embossed with silver lettering. Caldwell Medical Foundation. St. Vincent Hospital has a private pulmonary unit, he said carefully. I own part of the facility. Olivia's eyes narrowed immediately. Naomi looked wary. Ethan continued before anyone interrupted. Your brother could receive better treatment there tonight. Naomi did not move. Why? She asked softly. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but paused. Because for the first time in years, he realized he did not fully understand his own reason. Guilt? Damage control? Pride? Maybe all three. Judge Whitmore watched him carefully while Olivia studied every expression crossing his face. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly. Because no 19-year-old should struggle to breathe while adults argue over ego. The room fell silent again. Naomi stared at him for several long seconds, searching his face carefully as if trying to decide whether there was sincerity hidden somewhere beneath all the arrogance. Then her phone rang a third time. This time when she answered, her expression drained of color instantly. Daniel, she whispered. The entire restaurant watched her face change while the sound of rain continued falling against the windows of Caldwell Grand. Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone so suddenly that even Marcus noticed. The color drained from her face beneath the warm chandelier light, while every conversation inside Caldwell Grand faded into nervous silence again. Daniel, she whispered sharply, slow down. I cannot understand you. Ethan Caldwell watched her carefully from only a few feet away. Whatever expression had been on her face moments earlier was gone now. This was fear stripped completely bare. Naomi turned slightly away from the crowd, pressing one hand against her ear while the sound of rain hammered harder against the windows overlooking Manhattan. What do you mean they are transferring you? She asked. Her breathing became uneven for the first time all night. Olivia Pierce exchanged a glance with Judge Whitmore. Marcus looked ready to call an ambulance himself. Then Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Okay, she whispered. I am coming right now. She lowered the phone slowly. The room waited. Daniel collapsed in the waiting area, she said quietly. They moved him upstairs. Marcus immediately grabbed his car keys from the hostess stand. I will drive you. But Ethan spoke first. No, Everyone turned toward him again. Ethan already had his phone out. My driver is downstairs. Naomi shook her head immediately. That is not necessary. Ethan ignored the protest completely. St. Vincent is 22 blocks away in this weather. Traffic is backed up across Midtown. His voice remained calm now. Controlled. Efficient. You will never reach him quickly enough in a cab. Naomi stared at him uncertainly. A strange tension settled between them. Just 1 hour earlier, Ethan Caldwell had been ready to throw her out of the hotel in humiliation. Now he was organizing transportation to help her reach the hospital. The contradiction made the entire room uncomfortable. Olivia folded her arms. Interesting transformation. Ethan glanced at her coldly. Not everything is a headline. Tonight, Olivia replied quietly. Almost everything is. Ethan dialed quickly. Richard, he said into the phone. Bring the car to the front entrance immediately. Naomi still looked hesitant. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate the offer, but I do not need charity. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket. This is not charity. Then what is it? Naomi asked softly. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out immediately, because the truth was complicated. Part guilt, part responsibility, part confusion. He had spent most of his adult life believing weakness created failure. Tonight he had encountered someone exhausted, overworked, financially overwhelmed, and emotionally drained who somehow still carried more grace than half the billionaires he knew. That realization unsettled him more than the viral video. Judge Whitmore stepped closer to Naomi gently. Sometimes accepting help is not weakness. Naomi looked down briefly. I know. Her voice grew quieter. I just learned a long time ago not to expect it. Those words hit the room harder than anyone expected. Ethan looked away toward the rain-covered skyline again. He suddenly remembered being 19 years old himself. Private schools, chauffeurs, security guards. His biggest concern had been whether he wanted to spend spring break in Aspen or Monaco. Meanwhile, Naomi's younger brother spent his 19th year sitting in emergency rooms trying to breathe properly. The comparison sat heavily in Ethan's chest. Marcus cleared his throat softly. Naomi, he said, go change out of your uniform first. Naomi looked down at the black server apron tied around her waist as though she had forgotten she was still working. Right. She moved toward the hallway leading to the employee lockers. But before she disappeared behind the kitchen doors, Ethan spoke again. Naomi. She paused. Your job is safe. The word surprised everyone, including Ethan himself. Naomi turned slowly. I thought I was fired. Ethan held her gaze for a long second. You are not. Olivia watched him carefully. That sounds dangerously close to self-awareness. Ethan did not respond. Naomi disappeared through the kitchen doors while the restaurant slowly began breathing again. Guests resumed quiet conversations, though nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. The atmosphere had changed permanently. Ethan loosened his tie slightly for the first time that evening. Suddenly, the expensive restaurant felt warmer, smaller, more suffocating. Olivia stepped beside him near the windows. You know what the internet loves most? She asked quietly. Ethan sounded tired now. Tell me. Hey. Powerful man being humbled publicly. Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. Then tonight must feel like Christmas for you. Olivia shook her head. No. She looked toward the kitchen hallway where Naomi had disappeared. What interests me is her. Ethan said nothing. Most people would have tried to use this situation. Olivia continued. She did the opposite. Judge Whitmore joined them slowly. That is because dignity and attention rarely live inside the same person comfortably. Ethan rubbed one hand across his jaw while thunder rolled outside again. His phone buzzed suddenly with incoming messages. Board members, public relations executives, investors. The first headline had already appeared online. Caldwell Hotel incident goes viral. Ethan stared at the screen silently. Another notification appeared immediately after. Company stock discussions exploding overnight. Public backlash building by the minute. Marcus noticed the tension crossing Ethan's face. Sir. Ethan locked the phone slowly. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, is going to be a disaster. Then the kitchen doors opened again. Naomi stepped back into the restaurant wearing a simple dark coat over her uniform while holding a worn backpack against one shoulder. She looked exhausted, but somehow she still carried herself with calm dignity beneath the lights of the restaurant that almost broke her tonight. Ethan looked at her differently now. Not like staff. Not like a problem. Like someone whose strength made his own life suddenly feel strangely empty. The Blacktown car moved through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan, while traffic lights reflected across the wet pavement like broken pieces of gold. Naomi Brooks sat silently in the back seat, clutching her phone tightly against her coat, while Ethan Caldwell sat across from her. Unusually quiet for a man who spent his life controlling conversations. Outside the tinted windows, New York rushed past in streaks of headlights and blurred umbrellas. Inside the car, tension sat heavily between them. Richard, Ethan's driver, focused carefully on the road while soft classical music played low through the speakers. Naomi finally looked down at her phone. Again, more missed calls, more messages from Daniel. Her younger brother hated hospitals. Ever since their mother died, every emergency room reminded him of loss. Ethan watched her carefully without making it obvious. For years he had built his world around efficiency. Every relationship had purpose. Every meeting had value. Every conversation moved toward advantage. But Naomi unsettled that system completely because she expected nothing from him. Not money, not status, not approval. That made her impossible to control. "How long has your brother been sick?" Ethan asked quietly. Naomi kept looking out the window. "Since childhood." Ethan nodded slightly. "And your parents?" Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone again. "My father left when Daniel was 6. Her voice remained calm. "My mother worked 2 jobs until she got too sick to continue." The city lights passed across Ethan's face while he listened. "So you became responsible for everything." Naomi gave a faint, humorless smile. "That is what happens in families sometimes." Ethan looked away briefly. He suddenly remembered the last argument he ever had with his own father. 12 years ago, a private office overlooking Central Park. His father had told him something Ethan never forgot. "You know the difference between rich people and strong people?" Ethan had laughed back then. "There is no difference." His father had shaken his head slowly. "Rich people panic when money cannot solve the problem." Ethan stared quietly through the rain now, realizing how much he hated remembering that conversation tonight. Naomi's phone buzzed again. She answered immediately. "Daniel." Relief softened her face for half a second. "Okay, good." She listened carefully while leaning forward slightly. "No, I am close now. Just stay calm and let the nurses help you breathe." Her voice changed completely whenever she spoke to her brother. Softer, warmer, protective. Ethan noticed it immediately. "I know you are scared," Naomi whispered gently. "But I am coming." The call ended. Silence returned. Ethan glanced toward her. "Is he stable?" Naomi nodded slowly. "For now." She looked exhausted. Not dramatic exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind carried by people who had spent too many years surviving one crisis at a time. Ethan loosened his tie slightly again. "You should not have been working tonight." Naomi looked at him directly for the first time since leaving the hotel. People who need money do not always get the luxury of rest. The sentence landed harder than she intended. Ethan looked down briefly. Somewhere deep inside himself, irritation mixed with shame in ways he did not fully understand. The car stopped at a red light near Lexington Avenue. Outside, a delivery worker rode through the rain on a bicycle while taxis splashed through puddles beneath glowing storefronts. Naomi stared silently through the window. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said suddenly. She looked toward him cautiously. "Why did you stay calm back there?" Ethan asked. "At the restaurant." Naomi frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Most people panic around me." His voice carried no arrogance now. Only honesty. "You did not." Naomi thought about the question for several seconds before answering. "Because humiliation only works if the other person accepts it." Ethan stared at her quietly. "And you did not." Naomi shook her head once. "No." The car became silent again except for the sound of rain against glass. Ethan studied her carefully beneath the dim interior lighting. She was exhausted, worried, financially overwhelmed. Yet somehow she still carried herself with more composure than executives twice her age. He suddenly understood why the entire restaurant had shifted toward her tonight. Strength recognized strength, even when power refused to. "You know," Ethan said slowly, "most people would have taken the money." Naomi gave a tired smile, without humor. "That is because most people spend their lives trying to impress wealthy men." Ethan almost smiled back despite himself. "And you do not." Naomi looked directly at him. "Mr. Caldwell, I spent years watching my mother choose medication over groceries. I watched debt collectors call while she could barely stand up from chemotherapy treatments. After enough pain, expensive watches stopped looking impressive. Ethan had no response to that. None. The truth in her voice cut deeper than accusation ever could. The car finally turned into the emergency entrance at St. Vincent Medical Center. Nurses moved quickly beneath bright hospital lights while rain poured across the parking area outside. Richard parked near the entrance immediately. Naomi reached for the door handle, but paused unexpectedly. Ethan looked at her. What? Naomi hesitated. Why are you really helping me? Ethan opened his mouth automatically, prepared to give some polished answer about responsibility or public relations. But the words never came. Because for the first time all night, he realized something uncomfortable. He did not know the answer anymore. Naomi studied his silence carefully. Then she nodded once as though she understood more than he did. She stepped out into the rain-covered hospital entrance while Ethan remained sitting inside the car, watching her disappear beneath the fluorescent lights. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt something unfamiliar pressing heavily against his chest. Not anger, not pride, not control, conscience. Hospital waiting rooms humbled everyone eventually. It did not matter whether someone arrived wearing designer suits or restaurant uniforms. Under fluorescent lights and the sound of distant medical monitors, fear reduced people to what they truly were. Ethan Caldwell sat alone near the vending machines inside St. Vincent Medical Center while rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his expensive coat. Across the room, families whispered quietly beside paper coffee cups and exhausted prayers. A little girl slept against her father's chest near the entrance. An elderly couple held hands in silence beside the elevators. Nobody cared that Ethan Caldwell owned half the building. Hospitals erase status that way. Ethan checked his phone again. The situation outside these walls had become worse. Much worse. News websites had picked up the restaurant video nationwide now. Comment sections exploded with outrage. Television anchors replayed the footage repeatedly beneath headlines about privilege and public humiliation. Caldwell hospitality stock had dropped nearly 6% overnight in overseas trading. His public relations team had sent 32 messages in the last hour alone. One text from a board member stood out above the rest. Control this immediately. Ethan locked the screen slowly and leaned back against the chair. For the first time in years, he felt tired in a way money could not solve. Down the hallway, Naomi stood outside Daniel's hospital room, speaking softly with a nurse while adjusting the strap of her worn backpack. Ethan watched quietly from a distance. Even exhausted, she thanked every employee who helped her brother. She listened carefully. She stayed patient. She carried herself with dignity in places where most people lost it. A young doctor finally approached her holding a tablet. Naomi's shoulders immediately tensed. Ethan stood instinctively without realizing it. Your brother is stable now, the doctor explained gently. Naomi closed her eyes briefly in relief. Thank God. But his treatment plan needs to change, the doctor continued carefully. The specialist is recommending overnight monitoring and additional pulmonary testing. Naomi nodded slowly. Okay. Then came the pause. The dangerous pause people recognized before difficult conversations. Unfortunately, the doctor said gently, your insurance coverage is limited. Naomi's expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Familiar exhaustion. The kind people carried after hearing bad financial news too many times. How much? She asked quietly. The doctor hesitated. The estimated cost for the next round of treatment could reach $28,000. Naomi looked down immediately. Ethan watched the moment carefully from across the hallway. Her face stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around the backpack strap so hard her knuckles turned pale. I understand, she whispered. The doctor lowered his voice sympathetically. We can discuss payment options. Naomi forced a polite smile that looked painfully practiced. Of course. The doctor walked away. Naomi remained standing alone beneath the harsh hospital lighting for several seconds without moving. Then she leaned lightly against the wall and closed her eyes. Not dramatic. Not broken. Just tired. Deeply tired. Ethan crossed the hallway slowly before he could talk himself out of it. Naomi noticed him immediately and straightened again. You heard? She asked softly. Ethan nodded once. 28,000. Naomi gave a faint, humorless laugh. Might as well be 28 million. Ethan studied her face carefully. You still will not let me help. Naomi looked away toward Daniel's hospital room. You already know why. Ethan slipped both hands into his coat pockets. No, he admitted quietly. I do not think I do. Naomi stared at him for a long second, almost surprised by the honesty in his voice. Finally, she spoke softly. Because people like me learn early that favors from powerful people usually come with invisible prices. Ethan frowned slightly. You think I expect something in return? Naomi answered immediately. I think wealthy men are rarely taught how to help without needing control. The words hit him harder than public criticism online ever could. Because somewhere beneath his pride, Ethan knew she was right. Every donation his company made came with press releases. Every scholarship carried the Caldwell name in giant silver letters. Every favor created leverage. He had spent his entire life confusing generosity with influence. Ethan sat down slowly beside her against the hallway wall. The silence between them no longer felt hostile now, just honest. Nurses moved quietly past them while distant thunder rattled the hospital windows. When my father died, Ethan said unexpectedly, I inherited more money than I knew how to spend. Naomi listened without interrupting. Everybody told me wealth creates freedom. He looked down briefly. But nobody tells you it also creates distance. Naomi studied him carefully now. Ethan continued quietly. After enough years, you stop knowing whether people see you or your power. Naomi looked toward Daniel's hospital room again. And tonight? Ethan exhaled slowly. Tonight was the first time in a long time somebody looked directly at me without fear. The hallway fell silent again except for the steady sound of rain outside. Naomi finally sat beside him slowly, exhausted beyond pride now. You know what scares me most? She whispered. Ethan looked at her. Not the bills. Her eyes drifted toward her brother's room. It is the idea that Daniel might believe his life has a price tag attached to it. Ethan stared at her quietly while something painful shifted deep inside his chest. Because suddenly he understood why Naomi Brooks felt different from everyone else he had ever met. She had suffered enough to understand what actually mattered. And people like that could not be bought. By sunrise, the story had reached every major news network in America. Clips from Caldwell Grand flooded television screens, podcasts, social media feeds, and financial websites while commentators debated privilege, power, and public humiliation over morning coffee. But inside St. Vincent Medical Center, none of that mattered. Naomi Brooks sat beside her brother's hospital bed, holding a paper cup of cold coffee, while Daniel finally slept peacefully beneath the soft hum of medical equipment. The storm outside had faded into gray morning drizzle across Manhattan. Ethan Caldwell stood near the hallway windows watching the city wake up beneath low clouds and restless traffic. His phone had not stopped vibrating for hours. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Investors wanted statements. Public relations executives begged him to release an apology before the market opened. But strangely, none of those voices felt as loud anymore. Ethan looked through the glass toward Naomi and Daniel quietly. The small hospital room held nothing expensive. No luxury, no status, just exhaustion, loyalty, and love. Somehow it felt more real than every penthouse apartment he owned combined. Naomi noticed him standing there eventually. She stepped carefully into the hallway, closing the hospital room door halfway behind her. He finally fell asleep, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Good. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nurses moved quietly through the corridor while sunlight slowly pushed through the storm clouds outside. Naomi looked exhausted beyond words now, but calmer. Ethan studied her face carefully before speaking. The hospital administration already approved Daniel's treatment plan. Naomi looked at him immediately. What? Ethan kept his voice even. The pulmonary specialist. The overnight care. The medication adjustments. Naomi's expression tightened cautiously. How? Ethan held her gaze. I made one phone call. Naomi stepped back slightly. Mr. Caldwell. No, he interrupted softly. Listen first. His voice carried something unfamiliar now. Not authority. Humility. Nobody is sending you a bill. Naomi stared at him silently. I told you already, she said quietly. I do not want charity. Ethan nodded slowly. And I told you already this is not charity. Naomi folded her arms protectively. Then what is it? Ethan looked toward Daniel's hospital room before answering. Accountability. The hallway became silent again. Ethan continued carefully. Last night I looked at your life and saw a waitress. He exhaled slowly. That was my failure, not yours. Naomi watched him without speaking. Ethan glanced down briefly before continuing. I built my entire world around the idea that success meant being respected. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. But fear is not respect. It just takes successful people longer to realize the difference. Naomi studied him carefully. For the first time since meeting him, Ethan Caldwell sounded honest without trying to sound impressive. That mattered. The internet hates you right now, Naomi said softly. Ethan almost laughed. That may be the first truthful thing anyone has said to me in years. Naomi looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. Then why help me now? Your reputation would recover faster if you stayed far away from this hospital. Ethan nodded slightly. Probably. He looked directly at her again. But I spent most of my life learning how to protect my image. His voice lowered quietly. I never learned how to repair my character. Those words stayed suspended in the hallway while morning light slowly filled the windows behind them. Naomi said nothing for several seconds. Then she asked the one question Ethan feared most. Do you actually regret what happened? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Not because he needed time to invent an answer. Because he finally understood the truth. I regret that humiliating people became normal to me. Naomi looked at him carefully after hearing that. No excuses. No polished corporate language. Just honesty stripped bare. Somewhere deep inside herself, part of her anger loosened slightly. Not disappeared, but shifted. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and removed a folded document. Judge Whitmore called someone from Columbia Law School this morning, he said quietly. Naomi frowned in confusion. Ethan handed her the paper. Apparently your academic record impressed a lot of people before you left. Naomi unfolded the document carefully. Her eyes widened instantly. Full tuition reinstatement. Emergency scholarship approval. Direct invitation to return to Columbia Law beginning next semester. Naomi looked speechless for the first time since Ethan met her. How? She whispered. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. Turns out powerful people can still be useful when they stop protecting their ego long enough to help somebody else. Naomi stared down at the letter while emotion finally cracked through her calm expression. Not dramatic tears, just disbelief. Years of sacrifice sitting silently inside one piece of paper. Ethan watched her carefully. You were right about something, he said softly. Naomi looked up slowly. What? Ethan glanced toward Daniel's room. A person's life should never feel like it has a price tag attached to it. Silence filled the hallway again, while nurses passed quietly in the distance. Then Naomi folded the scholarship letter carefully against her chest and looked directly at Ethan Caldwell one final time. Money did not change anything last night, she said softly. Character did. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly because deep down he knew something painful and permanent had happened inside him during those long hours between the restaurant and the hospital. He had entered Caldwell Grand believing power made him important. But somewhere between a viral video, a frightened younger brother, and a waitress who refused to surrender her dignity, Ethan Caldwell finally understood the difference between being admired and being worthy. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire walked away from a room feeling smaller than the person everyone once ignored.